Hi everyone, you're listening to the Southasia Review of Books podcast from Himal Southasian, where we speak to celebrated authors and emerging literary voices from across South Asia. I'm your host, Shwetha Srikanthan, coming to you from Colombo, and my guest today is the Sri Lankan-Pākehā writer, Saraid de Silva, joining us from Auckland to talk about her debut novel, Amma. Before we get started, I'd like to invite our listeners to check out Himal's Patreon program on our website, where you can pay to support our mission to give South Asian literature the spotlight it deserves. To make conversations like this possible, we need the support of our listeners like you. It's 1951 in old Singapore. 10-year-old Josephina kills her abuser. This becomes the defining moment in the lives of Josephina, her daughter Sithara, and her daughter Annie. Amma follows 3 generations of these South Asian women, whose stories move across Singapore in the 1950s, Colombo in the 1970s, Invercargill in the 1980s, Christchurch in the 2000s, and present-day London, Melbourne, and Colombo. This is a novel about how deeply the past impacts the present, and how shifting culture, circumstances, and misunderstandings have forced the women apart despite their love for each other, and what it will take to knit them back together again. It's ultimately about the often difficult and resilient connections between mother and daughter, and the inexplicably special relationship between grandmother and granddaughter, and how these reproduce themselves and change over time. Saraid, welcome to the Southasia Review of Books podcast, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about your brilliant novel.
Shwetha, thank you so much for that great intro.
So Saraid, to start us off, tell us about how the idea of Amma first came to be, and how much of the novel is autobiographical, and did writing Amma change how you view your own family's past and your relationship to Sri Lanka?
So, Amma came to be because I did a master's in creative writing at Auckland Uni, and I had to write a manuscript, which is Amma. I don't want to say like it became Amma, like it started out. That was always the book that I was writing. And as for how much of it is autobiographical, I think that I started with all of the circumstances that I knew something about. Like, the book is set in places I have lived or places I have traveled to. The family's whakapapa, like the family's origins, the family kind of lineage is similar to mine. I think, particularly it being my first novel, I wanted to write about what I knew. So I started with all these circumstances that I felt like I could speak to, and then everything that happens in the book is made up. And as for whether writing it changed my relationship to Sri Lanka, I definitely had to think about myself differently, maybe. What I mean by that is to appreciate that I'm like a diasporic person. I'm not a Sri Lankan, although I have described myself as that out of necessity, being a child of migrants and growing up here in Aotearoa. So, yeah, I think it made me think about my position or my positionality as a writer, and I think it made me think about that more deeply.
I also wanted to talk to you about the challenges of writing Josephina, Sithara, and Annie's stories as separate narratives, but also a singularly bounded story. Everything that happened to one of them, whether it was acknowledged or not, has the same roots, but it spreads out over time, just like the hair and the banyan tree, both of which you bring to life so beautifully in the book. Tell us more about this, and which one of the characters, locations, or moments in time did you find was the hardest to fully express?
Writing 3 characters who are very much bound to one another was really difficult. I think it meant in the end that I had to edit the novel in quite a I had to have my eyes over the entire book the whole time I was writing. So one little thing happening in one storyline or in one time period was always like had to have so many ripple effects. So I had to be quite across the board with the editing rather than like starting at the front and kind of making my way through. I was always trying to balance these three stories. Yeah, and also to what you're saying about how they all affect one another, to kind of understand that lives aren't easily explained, and like the ways that our families affect us and change our personalities. Like you can't really put your finger on it. You know what it feels like, but you don't always know why it's happening to you. I guess what I'm speaking about there is like trauma repeating itself, or facing the same challenges as the people who raised you and not really understanding why. Yeah, I was just thinking about that kind of the whole time I was writing the novel. And the hardest time period to write was definitely Singapore, like early Singapore, because it was quite hard for me to find like sources or for me to find information that didn't come from a really colonial lens, because I can only read in English. So I just had to, yeah, that was quite challenging. I researched that a lot before I started writing because I was really worried about getting things wrong or worried about not being able to like evoke that time accurately or respectfully. So yeah, that was definitely difficult.
Grief also plays a huge part in the novel and its inspiration. We see this most strongly in the form of loss when Josephina loses Party, her beloved grandmother, and then later the love of her life, Ravi. In the acknowledgements, you also say how when your own grandmother passed away, you didn't know where to put your grief, and it was too much for you and the people around you. So you wrote Amma, and this was your attempt to get to know her life at every age as well. And I think this month marks exactly 1 year since the novel first came out into the world. So, how has writing the story and carrying it forward changed this process of grief for you?
That's such a beautiful question. It honestly hasn't. It hasn't. I think that I believed when I started writing the book that it would make the reality of living in a world without my grandmother like easier to bear. But, you know, the dead stay dead no matter what we do. So I think it helped me in the aftermath of, she died in 2019, and I guess I started writing it in 2021. So it helped me, 2020 or 2021. It helped me, I think, yeah, as I said in the acknowledgements, it helped me to not have to talk about her for 24 hours a day, you know, because I could write this person and write into these lives that like reminded me of her, or which kind of put me back in dialogue with people like her or something. But you never, I don't know, I think that writing is kind of, when you're immersing yourself in it, or maybe when it's fiction particularly, you're conjuring something and it's not real, you know, it goes away. And yeah, so it was really, that was, I think, hard to realize. Yeah, and I don't know, and it sounds silly to sort of say that I thought that it was going to feel differently afterwards, or that I thought it was going to help ease it. But yeah, I think grief is just something that you like learn to live alongside, rather than learn how to put behind you or learn how to move past, right? You don't really move past it. You're always missing someone. And you just do what you can. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Saraid. I love the way you portray food in Amma. Even from the epigraph, it's clear that you reflect the significance it holds for diasporic communities as a way to access their heritage and culture. You also write about food so directly without any of the flourishes we usually encounter in fiction. So tell us more about how you map out the role of food in Amma. And does any of the food that you mention in the book, does it hold any special significance or memories tied to your own family across generations?
Oh, I I don't know if I put in the food that really has a lot of nostalgia for me personally. Like I grew up eating all the food in the book, and food I think for like, kids of immigrants is such a quick connection to your culture. Like I, as I've said, like I only speak English, so I don't have like my language, or I grew up so far away. I don't know. Food was kind of like this one access point that I knew a little about, or I knew how it was meant to taste, or I knew these words, and I didn't really recognize like hoppers anywhere other than, I didn't find them outside of my home. So yeah, I think that I don't even really think I mapped out the food in the book really. I'm just interested in what people are eating at any given time, and what the way you share foods says about how you feel about the people you're with, and what cooking for somebody means, and the ways that you can show love for somebody outside of saying that you care about them. Yeah, and I'm trying to think if there was any like particular meal in there that had we ate like milk rice in that way, in the to to mark an occasion or something, which I think which happens in the book. I know it happens in the book. But yeah, maybe not. Maybe there's not another. My gran used to make some really. She would kind of make these funny things that I felt like were just her own creation, and then I would realize it was a like oyster omelette, which I realized was a Singaporean thing when I got older, and I just thought it was a recipe my gran made up. So yeah, the food was kind of a naturally occurring part of the book.
I love when Annie calls Stringhoffers noodle pancakes. I'm going to start using that one.
I mean, it describes them. That's what they look
It's
like.
true. I mean, it is literally what it is. And Saraid, in the novel, Josephina experiences sexual violence as a child, and she kills her abuser. Sithara and Annie experience domestic violence, and we see Annie have this moment as well where she pushes back against that. And the young Tamil boy who worked in Josephina's home, the first boy who Suri loved when they were kids, is handed over to the army by Josephina after an incident when the two of them are caught together. Suri was also cast out by his Amma later for being gay. All these traumas continue to ripple through the family as time goes on. What led you to explore not just generational trauma, but the moments when people fight back, when they've had enough of the pain and the grief and enough of being powerless? And how much of this is a reflection of our present moment in the world?
I think that writing about people fighting back is hopeful. It's a hopeful way to write. When you're writing something and working on it for like a period of years, I guess for me, I believe that I know that this happens. I know that people resist violence, and that you can counter violence with violence when you need to. And yeah, that was the kind of book I wanted to live in while I was writing it. I don't think I could ever have written something where horrible things happened to children, to women, to queer people, and to not have them, fight back about it. I simply wouldn't want to like open the Word document and continue to write that. So, and in terms of how it reflects the world right now, yeah, I mean, we are, I don't know, I think that the time we're living in now is so affected by the Palestinian resistance and by by Palestinian bravery. And the reason why this, that struggle has come to the fore, other than Israel's hideous acts of violence, is because of the bravery of the Palestinian resistance. And that's that's part of the point, I think. So, I mean, and not that I wrote my book post that, but I think when every day I am opening my phone and seeing the most when every day when I'm opening my phone and watching so many parts of the world be governed by fascism, and we have a far-right government in New Zealand now who are also doing really violent things, I think everything I write is going to involve people are pushing back on violence that is done to them, because part of why I write is to maybe be able to live more, I don't know, to be able to cope with everything that's happening. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's sort of, the same thing I was saying about I wouldn't want to open a Word document and for things to be as hopeless in there as it can sometimes feel living in the world.
Along those lines, you've previously talked about how in Amma you play with this idea of anger to upend the cultural mythology around womanhood, gender, and femininity. Tell us about how you've used this rage, revenge, and violence, its impact on the lives of the people subject to it and their response to it, to confront structures of power through this story.
Well, Josephina and Annie are both real examples of what living in a state of kind of fight or flight, or what living with so much anger in your body does. They're able to defend themselves and defend people they love because of this enormous rage they have, but it also takes a really big toll on them as people, because it's very hard to live in that state for a really long period of time. And Josephine is a character who is so used to fighting that she can't recognize when to stop, I think. Yeah, but I am really interested in anger as a response, and I think that it's something that a lot of women particularly teach themselves not to feel. I think that it is quite hard to sometimes give yourself permission to be really, really angry at somebody who did something terrible to you. And I've seen that a lot in my life. People go to sadness first, or kind of draw their anger inwards and turn it on themselves, take responsibility for things that are not their fault. Meanwhile, there's somebody out there who hurt you, and you can't. And I've seen women not be able to give themselves permission to be angry at somebody outside of themselves. So yeah, I'm interested in people being angry. I'm interested in women being angry. I find it energizing.
As families often are, the characters in Amma remain unknowable to each other. Generations within families rarely share stories with each other, and family members often don't even know their loved ones want to hear about their pasts. And there's often a shared inability to be honest with one another, even at times when it matters most. You are the co-creator and co-host of Conversations with My Immigrant Parents, a podcast and video series sharing intergenerational conversations with immigrant families in New Zealand. And in one of the episodes, you even turn the mic onto yourself and your mother to reflect on your own experiences. So I would love to hear more about the kinds of conversations that came up through this project and how this might have informed and shaped the writing and characters within Amma.
Yeah, Conversations with My Immigrant Parents. Me and Julie too, whose house I'm actually in right now. Thanks, Julie. We made 2 seasons of that. I was so surprised to realize how common my own experience of my family was, and how, like, it was a relief to not feel unique and to not feel singular or something. I think just like sitting with so many families over the course of 3 seasons just, made me feel like the struggles and challenges of my own family were, there were so many people who could understand them. Not that I wasn't really thinking about my own family when I was doing it, but it's just maybe like a slow process of feeling more at home somewhere. I think I wrote something as a reflection after we finished making that series, and that was basically, my conclusion was just that it made me feel like I was part of a community, I think, more than I had felt growing up in Hamilton, not really knowing I didn't really know too many other families like mine. So it was just, families are so complicated. And what we did find a lot during that process was that people didn't know that other family members wanted to know about their lives. And I don't think that's, I think I dealt with that quite differently in my book, but I don't think that is often carelessness or selfishness. That just happens because people are busy, and that we don't always make the time because we don't really notice that we want or need to. We don't always make the time to sit down with our families and really run things through. Often that only comes up when you need, I don't know, medical detail or some kind of historical fact or something else in your life. And then I didn't, then you're finding out all these new things about the people you grew up with. So I loved making combos so much. I don't know if I would say that it informed the book, but it changed me as a person, which therefore naturally changed me as a writer.
You have this incredible ability to immerse the reader from one specific location to another. And to me, this geographical instability kind of spoke to the displacement and disorientation that comes with a South Asian immigrant experience. In Amma, you also had the huge task of writing about the immigrant experiences across multiple generations and geographies. There's a great article by the novelist Sanjana Sathian for The Drift, where she critically looks at Jhumpa Lahiri as a blueprint for the immigrant novel, and how increasingly readers in the West want to understand outsiders' narratives and to read the literature of minorities. But if we give ourselves to them, we have to insist on representing not our most respectable selves, but our truest ones. In what ways do you think Amma follows or challenges the tradition of how novels tell South Asian or specifically Sri Lankan immigrant stories?
Yeah, I loved that article. And after I read it, I also went and read the piece that Jhumpa Lahiri wrote for the New Yorker about learning Italian and about why she moved to Rome. And I had whatever information I had picked up about that was incorrect. I didn't realize that she had been learning Italian for a really long time before she went there. And it was so interesting to hear her talk about her relationship to English and that it felt that how she felt isolated inside of that language, even as she had been so successful through it. So loved reading both those pieces. I think I was extremely focused when writing Amma. I was very nervous about Sri Lankans reading it, and I don't even really dream big enough to imagine that many people in Sri Lanka would read it. But I was nervous about people here who knew more than I did reading my book, and I was so worried about getting things wrong and so worried about doing us a disservice to ourselves. I think I wasn't imagining white people reading my book. I was really nervous about South Asians reading my book. So it almost didn't enter into my head to write towards whiteness or to write like with a consideration of whiteness. But I think, I think that's because I've grown up in the diaspora, because I'm half white, because like I have all these sort of other privileges and access points that might mean it's kind of, I don't know, lives in my head differently. Or I think I worry about being answerable to different people. Yeah, I think that Amma does show South Asian women being pretty horrible to their closest family members, and also being really brave and really loving. But the women in the book are capable of like some pretty terrible things. I feel like we know that about ourselves, though. Yeah, maybe it's freeing. Maybe I don't think I felt free when I was writing, but I think maybe it is freeing to write towards people who already understand these parts of you. I didn't really feel like I needed to explain anything to do with culture to anyone. Yeah.
Saraid, thank you for that engaging conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast to talk about a book that will stay with me for a very long time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, and for spending this time. And thank you for reading the book in the way that you did. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Southasia Review of Books podcast from Himal Southasian. This episode was edited by Ritika Chauhan. If you like this episode, please share widely, rate, review, subscribe, and download the show on your favorite podcast apps. You can find the links to subscribe and listen to previous episodes on our website at himalmag.com. And while you're at it, please do also check out Himal's State of South Asia podcast, hosted by my colleague Nayanthara Narayanan, featuring conversations on pressing social and political issues from across South Asia. What we do and what we love doing at Himal is really looking at South Asian literature like no other. And that gives us a very unique community, viewpoint, and the privilege of making conversations like this possible. So if you'd like to help us out, please do become a paying Himal patron. We have a great program with lots of perks, including Himal's iconic right side up map, and we'll welcome you to a fantastic South Asia Review of Books community. Thanks again, and until next time.